Patch 9.17 is coming up pretty quick here, and as a result we have quite a few new changes on the PvE. This is one of the last patches before the Worlds patch. As a result, some of this stuff is highly experimental that they're trying to tweak before Worlds, and some of it will not ship before Worlds. Remember that just because something is on the PvE does not mean it is guaranteed to ship to the next patch. We may see some of these changes return in later cycles, and some of these changes might be taken out entirely. Make sure you're staying on top of things, checking out the official patch notes or our patch notes video once the patch drops. This way you won't be caught by surprise by anything that is taken out of the patch notes or put in last minute. If you haven't already, check out our website, GameLeap.com. There we have hundreds of guides all done by challenger players sorted into a quick and easy to use courses system. If you're looking to improve your play, this is one of the best ways to do it, so check us out using the link in the description below and sign up today. Kicking off the patch notes right away, we've got Aurelian's Soul back for more testing. These changes are highly experimental with no guarantee to ship. There are some minor tweaks to his passive which won't hit him too hard. It's going to be very similar damage with retracted stars, so not much to look at here. His Q is getting a quality of life buff, giving him more movement speed while having a lower cooldown. If he is faster than the star, then he won't have to wait for it to keep up. The biggest change is to Aurelian Soul's W. You're no longer going to be able to have his W active all the time, and it's not going to be a toggle ability. After 3 seconds, no matter what, it's going to go on cooldown, and it's no longer going to cost mana per second, and it's just going to cost a flat amount of mana. The cooldown has also been touched up a little bit, and you will be interacting with the cooldown significantly more often due to the fact that you're only going to be able to have it active 3 seconds at a time. While these changes do look pretty complex, ultimately I believe that they are just a trade-off. Early on into the game, you're not going to be able to shove lanes nearly as quickly. In exchange, late game you're going to have a lot more burst. Since these changes are so complex, it's hard to say exactly what they'll do to him in a tier list or to his win rate or pick rate. If these changes do go through and don't get yoinked off the PvE, we're definitely going to be keeping an eye on Aurelian Soul to see how he's performing. Moving on, we've got a small nerf to Aatrox. His base HP is going from 580 to 550. Now this is a very small change. It's not going to affect him nearly too much. His early game will be a little bit weaker in trades, but he's going to scale just as hard as he did. 30 HP early on into the game isn't even a full auto attack, so it's not going to make too much of a difference in his early trades. Matchups like Renekton and Riven are going to be a little bit harder for him after this patch due to the fact that they're going to be able to 100-0 him even easier than they were before. Galio has some straight buffs to him on the PvE, lowering his Q cooldown and increasing the damage on his W. It's good to see that Galio is still receiving attention, and it looks as though Riot is looking to make him a viable pick since they kind of killed him in previous patches. Next up are the changes that I am the most excited for. Riot has confirmed that these changes are most likely not going to ship, and they're just looking for feedback on the PvE. What I'm talking about specifically are the changes to Garen. Some of the numbers on his passive and his W are both being tweaked. The exciting part comes with Garen's E. The amount of spins on his E is going to scale based off of attack speed. Each one of these spins is also going to apply on-hit effects at 50% efficiency. This opens up Garen to a whole new slew of items including Titanic Hydra, Wit's End, Blade of the Ruined King, anything on hit really. However, the more interesting thing here is that it's going to allow you to take Conqueror and use Conqueror. Since your E has on-hit effects now, it's going to be able to stack Conqueror, something that you were never able to do before. The villain part of his kit's being completely removed, and his R is just always going to do true damage now. This takes away the minigame and allows you to focus the target that you really want to focus as opposed to always focusing the villain. Honestly, the villain was just a very frustrating mechanic to play against. Being the villain against Garen was very uninteractive, as you would have to just stay away from him until his ult was on cooldown in most cases. The ult also has some numbers tweaking paired with that. Since it's always going to be true damage, no matter who they're focusing, it's going to be dealing a little bit less damage. Kalista does have some small numbers changes, but these shouldn't really affect her all too much. Kayle is another champion with some highly experimental changes on the PvE. Now there's no planned release date for these changes, but I hope that these changes do make it before the Worlds patch. I think it would be awesome if Kayle was in a good enough spot to see her potentially in the Worlds tournament. Her base armor is up, allowing her to survive some of the more AD heavy matchups that she might have in the top lane. The biggest change to Kayle here, however, is to her passive. With this set of changes, her range form unlocks at level 6 as opposed to level 11. She also gets move speed in all directions instead of just movement speed towards enemy champions. If she is able to get to level 6, she becomes significantly more safe. She's able to farm from range and poke from range. Now her range and her attack speed are going to be a little bit lower in this form, so her level 11 is going to be a little bit weaker than it is currently. This is a small price to pay for a much earlier power spike. Lanes that you were already winning before level 11 are going to become that much easier, and lanes that were hard for you before level 11 will now become much more playable. The Transcendence buff at level 16 is going to be changed from true damage to an additional range buff. This is a pretty big nerf to her level 16 and onwards, but honestly, most games are ending before you're even able to get to level 16. Her ability to clear Baron minions is taking a huge hit because of this. Her Q is also going to be receiving some changes to the range and travel speed of the missile. If you are able to land your Q on an enemy champion, you're going to get half of the mana cost refunded. This helps a ton with the mana problems that she has in lane. Oftentimes she's not able to poke nearly as much as she wants to. The Shred is also receiving some adjustments, but it's hard to tell whether or not this is a buff or a nerf. It's most likely a nerf in the early game, but a buff in the later game. There are also some slight adjustments to Kayle's E, but these changes are just targeted to making it so that you don't max E first and instead you max your Q first. Kayle's R is receiving some buffs, making it cost less mana the higher rank it is. There's also a teeny little range buff on the ultimate as well. It makes it so that your auto range and your ultimate range match up a little bit better. Leona is getting 1 second off of her Q cooldown. This isn't really going to do much for her, honestly. Her mid game might be a little bit better in those really close fights, but in most cases it's not really going to help her too much. Lucian has a much needed buff on the PBE currently. His base AD is increased by 3, which will help with his normal autos as well as his passive. This won't be enough to push him into the meta, but it is a good start. On the PBE, Neeko's passive will now allow you to swap back to yourself. Before you had to enter combat with an enemy champion in order to do so, but now if you want to, you can swap back to yourself. Neeko's passive is the least used part of her kit, so I really don't think this is going to do anything at all. Pantheon's tapped Q will now crit enemy champions below 25%, similar to what his old Q used to do. This is nice because it allows him to execute champions directly on top of him without having to hold down his spear. He also has some changes on the PBE that make it so that he doesn't take reduced damage from monsters with his E anymore. It appears as though Riot doesn't really want Pantheon jungling, but we'll see if he'll still be able to jungle after these changes. Since jungle really isn't Pantheon's primary role at the moment and most people are playing him either support or mid, I don't foresee these changes really doing all too much. The Q buff is pretty nice, but the E change probably won't do anything. Qiyana has some changes on the PBE, lowering her E by 20 damage at all ranks and increasing her R to 120 at all ranks. These nerfs are a great starting point, but we're most likely to see even more nerfs in upcoming patches. Ryze has an increase in his base magic resist from 30 to 34, as well as 10 extra damage at each rank on his E. These changes are most likely targeted at moving him into the mid lane, as he is more of a top laner right now. And finally, last but not least, we have some changes to Zyra. The mana cost on Zyra's ultimate is going to be lowered to 100 at all ranks, and the cooldown is also going to be lowered by 20 at all ranks. I don't foresee these changes doing all too much for Zyra, however, the lowered cooldown on her ultimate might allow her to make more plays in the laning phase. Ultimately, this cycle on the PBE was pretty big and we have a lot of changes that we can look forward to. For those of you who haven't already, make sure to check out our website GameLeap.com. There we have hundreds of videos all done by challenger players sorted into a quick and easy to use courses system. We have courses both on the 5 fundamental roles as well as champion specific courses, so make sure to check it out. As always, I'm Panther, I hope you learned something valuable, and I will see you in the next one.